I am Abby Ingber, the Executive Director of the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder. And I have the great privilege to announce and introduce our two next speakers. I know for many of you sitting in this room and over Zoom, the family member perspective and the lived experience perspective are extremely important. And I am so proud and honored to have our next two speakers who we are inviting to be vulnerable and courageous and to tell you their story and their journey. Liz and Nico Santamorena are a mother and daughter duo. Nico has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and they just finished yesterday, right? Their final semester to become an art therapist, which is fantastic. And yes, a round of applause. And Nico's mother, Liz, has been an active family connections leader and a valuable part of NEABPD. It is my privilege to introduce both Liz and Nico to you today.
Thank you, Abby and Yale, for this conference. This is an incredible opportunity. Again, my name's Liz Santamorena, and I am the mother of twin girls. Nico is one of them, and she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder in 2016 at the age of 21. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share a little bit about my side of our family's journey with BPD, from the unknown through diagnosis, treatment, and recovery. From birth through age 7, Nico faced a lot of physical health challenges. Fortunately, her twin sister was relatively healthy. My attention was often consumed by Nico's physical needs. In hindsight, she also exhibited some emotional struggles, but they were overshadowed by her physical needs. By age 9, her emotional struggles were so evident, she began seeing a child psychiatrist. At that time, she was diagnosed with something called trichotillomania, which is a hair pulling disorder, along with anxiety and depression. And so began the stigma. Her early hair pulling disorder resulted in a saucer-sized bald spot on the top of her head. So as you can imagine, the teasing from friends, questions from other adults, parents, teachers. Why is she doing that? Doesn't that hurt? Does she have cancer? There were all kinds of assumptions and judgments that went on. And if that wasn't enough, my husband and I only added to our internal stigma. He was very ashamed and embarrassed by her missing hair. And I questioned myself and second-guessed myself. What had I done wrong to cause this? And what was I doing putting a 9-year-old on psych medicines? What would this do to her and her future in the long run? For the next 11 years, we witnessed Nico's moods and behaviors become increasingly confusing and more intense. Throughout this time, she did remain under psychiatric care and regularly saw a therapist. We did switch psychiatrists a couple of times, hoping for better results. And with each new doctor came new diagnoses and new medications and changes and their side effects. And as she grew, so did the stigma. And some of it came from the very doctors who were treating her. When I'd express concerns, they were often invalidating and dismissive, thinking I was making a bigger deal over things. She's fine. She'll outgrow things. At 16, her then psychiatrist actually told me, when I expressed the concern about her potentially turning to drugs, she said, if she hasn't done it by now, she's not going to. I thought, how could you possibly know this after spending 15, 20 minutes with my daughter every few months? You're not with her all the time like I am. Plus, she was really good at masking her behavior in front of other adults outside the home. By the time she was a junior in high school, I was the one calling her psychiatrist every 3 or 4 months to suggest a medication increase. And this was a pattern that we got into. Every 3 or 4 months, it was a major crisis and a mini crisis every 3 days. It still baffles me why these doctors didn't see this pattern, and it was all put on me to try to figure it out. Things continued to intensify and downward spiral during the first 2 years of her going off to college. I'd get nightly phone calls, usually startling me awake, and I couldn't even understand her through her screeches, sobs, crying. And I would start off being very kind and compassionate. After about 45 minutes to an hour, I would lose it. I'd start saying things like, "I'm getting off the crazy train, goodbye." And then when she didn't like what I had to say, she would call her sister at her college and disrupt her. I knew she was engaging in self-harm, especially after one of our visits to the ER. However, I was so afraid to talk about suicide, I thought I would only fuel the fire, so I never brought it up. The final straw, though, came the summer of 2016, when both my daughters and I attended the wake for a former classmate of theirs, as well as a former student she was of mine. When we saw her open casket, we all three felt the exact same things. These two had so many physical and other similarities. We actually felt like we were looking at Nico. And this catapulted me. From that moment on, afterwards, I said, we've got to do something else. Something has to change. So I had a new sense of urgency. And I reached out to our family therapist and said, my desperation, we really need more help. So she suggested how we might sit down and talk with Nico and kind of have an intervention. So that night, the three of us did. We sat at the table, and my husband did most of the talking because I was too emotional. But when I did say to her, I said, this has to be so exhausting for you living like this with all this pain and suffering. At that moment, she looked at me as if I saw her for the first time. And she said, you do love me. You do understand. And she did agree to go into treatment with 2 conditions. It couldn't be a hospital setting, and she wanted to get back in time for her fall semester. So I spent the next 24 hours in front of my computer looking for someplace. And finally, I found a residential treatment in Tennessee that would meet her needs and requirements as well as accept our insurance. As the saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. Boy, were we naive about residential treatment. First of all, my husband drove her there the 16 hours by himself. He didn't know he just had to drop her off and leave. We didn't know he couldn't help her get settled. I'll never forget him calling me from the car, sobbing. He doesn't cry. He was sobbing how horrible he felt to just leave her there and make her feel abandoned. Also, during the first week of her stay, we had no direct contact with her. It was only through her counselor. And over time, we got a little more contact, but we learned she had to earn phone privileges. This made us all feel like she was some sort of convicted criminal for her own mental illness. During the 3rd week of her stay, they had a family weekend, and my husband and I went down. Our other daughter wasn't able to attend. And this was the first time I heard about her diagnosis being borderline personality disorder. Along with that, it was the first time I'd have learned that there was anything else other than cognitive behavior therapy, something called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And while that weekend was really emotionally intense, it was also my first sense of hope. She looked so much better than she had in years. She put on a little weight. She looked like she'd been sleeping more. She was eating, and it gave me my first real sense of hope. And although the counselors recommended that she add on an additional 4 weeks to her stay, she only agreed to 2 more so that she could get back for the fall semester. While she was in treatment, I had all kinds of emotions. First one was I felt an enormous sense of relief. It was the first time in the longest time I could sleep through the night without worrying about her safety or my sleep getting interrupted. And then I had a lot of guilt over feeling relief. Second guessing myself, was she in the right place? Were we making more mistakes? I also had resentment. Why did it take so long for this diagnosis? I talked to our family therapist who concurred, yeah, we're really hesitant to diagnose someone, especially so young, under 18 and early adulthood. I also had increased anger and shame. Shame at myself because I really didn't want her to have another label or diagnosis. And also was really hurtful. I felt shame from 2 remarks from people who I really looked up to and respected. And one of them was from our general practitioner, who when I told her about the diagnosis, she looked at me with such pity and she said, "Oh, you know there's no cure for that, right?" And that just felt like, oh my gosh, she has a fatal disease. And then a very close friend of mine, whose daughter had recently come out of rehab for substance abuse, said, "Oh, Liz, I'm so sorry. My daughter's just an addict. Yours has mental illness." And her daughter was a heroin addict. That felt like a gut punch and a knife in my heart. She did come home and return to college with the agreement that her mental health was her top priority. Her discharge plan included that she continue outpatient DBT. She went one day. It wasn't a good fit. It did take some time to find a more suitable program for her as well as a DBT therapist and a psychiatrist for prescribing meds. We learned through that process, it's like kissing a lot of frogs. Shortly after her return from residential treatment, I also began attending a support group through my local MHA. And there I had a wonderful support leader who advised me, learn everything you can about her diagnosis, the treatment, and any associated medications. And her advice led me to an internet research where, thank goodness, I found NEA and family connections. And that was just what we needed for my husband and I. So we took the weekend intensive course. And the biggest thing we learned there was we learned a lot and there was so much to learn. I did try immediately integrating some of the tools and skills that were recommended. Also, hearing them and learning about them is one thing, and doing them effectively is quite another. One of the first things I did was to post what are called the basic assumptions. And I used those as a compass. We posted them in my kitchen. I said, everybody, this is a reminder. This is our compass. This is where we want to go. One thing that was especially helpful in those assumptions is that we are all doing the very best we can in this moment, and we need to try to do even better. I also carried the rights of relatives card around with me, and that was a consistent personal reminder to myself that I don't have to be the fixer. My life is my own, and I don't have to be perfect. I also tried using this thing called validation. And at first it felt really unnatural and uncomfortable and honestly seemed kind of ridiculous. And my daughter looked at me like I had 2 heads. However, I believed in it and I said, I'm going to keep with it. And that led me to taking leader training through Family Connections. And that really, really honed my skills. It gave me a much deeper understanding of how these skills and tools were benefiting me, my relationship with my daughter, and quite honestly, my relationships with everyone. I'll never forget Dr. Alan Frizzetti, who is one of the co-creators of that program, who his messaging imprinted in my brain. He said, if somebody with BPD has even one person who truly validates and gets them, it highly increases their likelihood of success and recovery. I vowed right then, I'll be that person for my daughter. After leader training, another relatively small change that I made, but was very significant, was deciding to go on a butt diet. By this, I mean replacing the word but with the word and. Very quickly, we noticed the difference in our transactions. It was a lot less oppositional. I also began leading Family Connections courses in 2018. And this has been and continues to be the best way for me to hone and try to get even better and better at my skills. One of the things that I've done now is led over a dozen of these courses, and I've connected with over 100 other families with stories similar to mine. And honestly, that's been food for my soul. This past year, I've also joined NEA's advocacy committee, and I'm so proud to be such a small part of these great change makers. Some other things that have worked for us. My daughter and I were learning DBT skills around the same time. This gave us a language, a common language we could share, such as, hey, I'm feeling too dysregulated to continue this conversation right now. And using things like the Dear Man tool when we had to discuss a problem or concern. The DBT skill Cope Ahead has been really helpful for us, especially with going to restaurants and family gatherings. Also, since my daughter and I live together, we realized sometimes we need a relationship vacation. It can be a really long journey, feeling like a marathon sometimes. So a few days apart can do wonders to recharge our batteries and make us feel more appreciative and reconnected. We also try to inject humor whenever and wherever we can. Some of our ongoing challenges are timing. It's been a long, slow process. Sometimes it feels like one step ahead and two steps back. I remember those first 3 years, I was especially frustrated. I'd call her therapist, I'm learning these skills, she's learning them, she's not using them. She's like, Liz, your daughter knows these skills so well, she could teach them. When I talked to her about that, she goes, yeah, I know them. I choose not to use them. It was very frustrating. And then sometime around 25, I don't know, they say judgment sets in. I think she got it. She's like, it is easier when I'm skillful. So she began doing that. Timing, though, our moods and feelings, things, our vulnerabilities can be at different places and different times. So that's an ongoing challenge. Also at 25, she had the added diagnosis of autism. And this has brought on some special nuances. Even when I think I'm being crystal clear, it can confuse her. She gets kind of stuck and dysregulated. But together, we're now working on that phase of our journey. My husband still struggles. And sometimes he avoids engaging with her. I have to remind him, you took the same Family Connections course I did. You learned the same skills. It's up to you to practice and use them. Especially acceptance. I've told him you have to accept her brain and emotion system work different than yours. He had a hard time with this. I think it's getting much better since I related it to him this way. I said, if she were missing a limb, would you expect her to grow a new one? Since that, it seems like he's doing a lot better. The other issue for me is grief and loss. That's a hard one because it can creep up on me and really take me under if I'm not being mindful and paying attention and using the steps I've learned to process grief and loss in Family Connections, especially when I start to compare my life with other people. I look at other families and things that are going on, and it can bring me under. However, I'll try to see a stop sign in my head as a way of saying, redirect, refocus. Nico has lost over 6 people to suicide. My new definition of success is my daughter no longer wants to die. That's been huge. We're not perfect, far from it. There's still a lot of work to do, especially on my relationship with my other daughter, who has rightfully so felt she had to take a back seat. Overall, things have gotten easier, and it's by taking baby steps, staying committed. The difference today is it no longer feels like I'm trapped on a hamster wheel. Now, I kind of see it as speed bumps along the way. Our journey has been long with a lot of trial and error, a lot of pain and suffering, and it has brought tremendous growth and joy. I truly believe these skills have helped us become better people. We're better versions of ourselves with the best of us yet to be. Early on, I told Nico, I won't give up on you. Please don't give up on me. And she hasn't. We work really hard together. And nothing gives me more gratitude, joy, pride than witnessing how far we've come. I'm honored to walk beside her through this journey. She has been and continues to be my life's greatest teacher. I'm so proud of where she's been and where she's going. Perhaps you or someone you know has experiences and stories similar to ours. Please share them so you can help reduce stigma. And while recovery is possible, it's not guaranteed. I know my family's fortunate. I want to share my good fortune with you, my amazing daughter, Nico.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nico Santamorena, and as my mom did, I would like to thank Yale and NEABPD for this amazing opportunity. A few things about me. I'm a person living with BPD. I also identify as LGBTQ, have an autism diagnosis, and have several rare genetic disabilities that we didn't figure out for a long time. I'm very open about my experiences as a marginalized person. I have done LGBTQ plus disability, mental health advocacy for a very long time, but I've had yet to feel comfortable disclosing that I have a BPD diagnosis. This is due in large part to the stigma surrounding BPD, including and unfortunately in my chosen profession. And like Abby said, I graduate next week and start my clinical work. So I haven't talked about this with anybody. Looking back on my life, I can't really think of a time where I didn't feel different. I've always felt other. Some people want to feel unique, but I wanted nothing more than to just blend into the wall. I wanted to disappear, but somehow people could always sense that I was different. I experienced various traumas and invalidating environments early on. Like I said, I've had physical health issues that left me feeling very alone. I was much more sensitive emotionally and environmentally. I often got along way better with animals than people, so I spent a lot of time with them. I was frequently bullied by my peers for behavioral differences. I felt misunderstood by my family due to these behavioral and cognitive differences that I now know are related to autism and BPD. I was always being told that I'm too sensitive. My emotions were too much. I'm dramatic. People were very dismissive of my feelings and experiences. And as my mom said, I started pulling out my hair. And I think I did it to regulate my emotions. And whether it was conscious or subconscious, it did work until it didn't, as with most coping mechanisms that aren't serving you. I've been in therapy for 20 years, but my first few experiences didn't feel like the right fit. I didn't feel supported or like I was gaining any skills. And as my mom said, I've been on psych med since I was 10 with that persistent pattern. Everything would be fine until things would build and build and build, and then they would explode. By the time I got to college, I had no idea who I was or what I wanted. And it seemed like my peers really kind of knew. So I felt lost out in the sea by myself. My sense of self was in constant flux, and my self-concept was dismally empty, devoid of hope or positivity. I was terrified of what came next. Nothing seemed to be going right. I had constant breakdowns, panic attacks, calling my mom at all hours, depressive episodes. I was actively putting myself in danger because I either felt so numb and awful, or I just didn't want to feel at all. I would put myself in these situations to lessen the pain for a while. I had erratic and very volatile relationships. None of my friendships lasted. They would just suddenly stop talking to me, and I had no idea what I did. I felt I'm broken, I'm bad, no one wants to be my friend. I managed to keep some people who were around, but they manipulated my vulnerabilities. I had a friend during this time who would psychologically, emotionally, and physically abuse me. I transferred schools and switched majors 3 times, thinking that this would help, but they were just Band-Aids on bullet wounds. I started self-harming and constantly thought about new ways to numb my pain. If I wasn't thinking about numbing my pain, I was thinking about dying. I truly believed that everyone in my life would be better off if I was gone. I believed if I died, they would finally be able to be happy. The suicide of a childhood classmate, as my mom said, was the floor falling out from under me. My big reality check. I saw myself when I looked at her in her casket. I was following the same path and I knew things couldn't continue this way. I was either going to die or I needed to take control and change my life. I needed help. And in reality, I didn't want to die. That's not what I wanted. I just wanted my pain to go away. I agreed to go to residential treatment. And as my mom said, I did not want to go to a hospital. I was traumatized by hospitals, having so much medical experience early on. I also witnessed a friend attempting suicide and I stopped her. And when she was taken by police to the hospital, it was so violent and traumatic. I said, no way, I never want that to happen to me. It was very dehumanizing. And I thought, I do not want to be in that kind of environment. So it was a residential program for me. Going into treatment was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It was heartbreaking and scary. And I had to say goodbye to the way things were and accept that things and myself needed to change. At 21, I was diagnosed with borderline. I had already suspected I had BPD for quite some time, but it was so stigmatized that I was afraid to bring it up with my previous psychiatrist, who, as my mom said, never really spent more than 15 minutes with me. Before my borderline diagnosis, I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, OCD, major depression, panic disorder, and mood disorder not otherwise specified. I knew others with these diagnoses, yet I could not relate to them when they all seemed to be able to relate to each other. This made me feel very ashamed and like I was defective. I was like, why are they all having these diagnoses and relating to each other and I'm over here in no man's land? I came from a family culture, as my mom said, where labels were seen as limiting yourself and predetermining how you were perceived. For me, though, getting this diagnosis felt like a giant weight, a dark cloud being lifted off of me. I could breathe. I could feel. There was an explanation and a reason. And I've always loved knowing things. I love researching. I love learning. In this case, knowledge of my diagnosis saved me. Understanding what was happening to me gave me a sense of relief. It also brought a lot of shame. Even the facility where I was diagnosed at times talked about people with borderline as if we were purposefully being difficult. Thus, I felt further ashamed to talk about my diagnosis. And as my mom said, I continued agreeing to go to treatment, but I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be home. It was lonely and kind of felt awful there, but I knew I had to do it. When I came back, I suddenly became acutely aware of stigma everywhere. Books, movies, just normal conversations. And when I would hear these, I would immediately shut down and retreat into myself. I heard things from family friends, and people online, even mental health professionals. Coming back from treatment was very lonely for me. After some unsuccessful attempts at finding local DBT programs and a therapist, I attended the Silver Hill DBT program and began seeing my therapist that I have now, who I love. She's like the most amazing person in the world. She's very mean to me in a way that I need. I credit these with making the biggest impact. It was during this time that I finally started to feel that I had direction and hope again. I felt hopeful for the future. What also helped immensely was, like my mom said, that I was not doing this on my own. She was right there beside me, learning DBT skills too. We practice with each other all the time and working consistently to better ourselves in our relationship, supporting ourselves. I've found that humor about the process and the diagnosis and learning the skills has helped us ingrain them into routine. We make jokes with each other all the time saying, do you remember back then when we were like this? And then we laugh about it. We also have normalized that sometimes we need to go back to the basics because in times of stress, you can't always think clearly. And for me, letting go of the need to control situations or right fighting, instead, I center the relationship. We've come to understand that we both need to be in the right headspace for conversations, especially timing and energy levels. We've become more mindful of each other's emotional states and honoring our limits, which has reduced resentment and frustration. I also maintain a mindfulness practice and practice my DBT skills basically every day in some capacity. And becoming an art therapist helps in this too. When you're teaching your clients skills, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that one. Some relationships and situations have remained difficult, even with the skills. My dad isn't always the most patient or understanding, especially if it's something he can't see, like borderline or autism. And this impacts my level of regulation and tolerance, but I know that he loves me, so I keep trying. Also, others in my social sphere, such as family friends, speak quite negatively about loved ones with personality disorders, insisting that I am nothing like their person. Oh, Nico's so sweet. They're so thoughtful. I was like your person. It feels very hurtful to hear what sounds like giving up on the person that they love and that they get treated like a problem rather than someone. Presently, we always practice our skills and reflect back on the times where we were less successful, acknowledging the ways in which we've grown. We have a great relationship, which felt impossible before this journey started because I would tell her all the time, "You don't love me, I hate you." My mom is my best friend and my biggest supporter, my learning partner. It has become my mission to use my lived experience to help others, to make meaning out of all of the struggle and pain. I do this because I never want anybody else to feel as alone and isolated, as misunderstood as I felt. I don't want stigma or lack of understanding to impede someone from getting support. I am so grateful of where I am today, and I know it would be impossible without all the support and understanding that I've had from my mom and therapist. I used to meet all 9 of the criteria. Today, I meet 1, and on a bad day, I meet 2. I truly believe that if you have just one person wholly in your corner, the odds of recovery drastically increase. Eliminating stigma and being met with empathy are key protective factors. I hope that by sharing our story, we can lessen stigma and increase understanding so that more people with BPD can have recovery stories like mine. Thank you so much.